Hello everybody. It is currently 2:46 a.m. I just spent 2 hours trying to get a microphone to work, and today we're going to be talking about bubbo. If you don't know what bubbo is this wonderful thing. They look like this, they sound like this, and I'm gonna be doing a breakdown of what exactly bubbo means. Bubbo is what falls into the category of what I would call a concept album. A concept album, by definition, according to Wikipedia, is an album whose tracks hold a larger purpose or meaning collectively than they do individually. I believe that is the case for bubbo, because if you were like throwing on a bthreebbo or a bsevenbbo just for fun, is unparalleled to listening to the entire album as a whole. It's like throwing on King Kunta or Alright as opposed to listening to the entirety of To Pimp a Butterfly. Now for those true Kendrick fans out there, I hope you caught on to my epic joke, because when I said bthreebbo and bsevenbbo and compared it to King Kunta and Alright off of To Pimp a Butterfly, and if you're a real Kendrick fan, Alright is the 7th song on the album and King Kunta is the 3rd song on the album. So it was funny because I said King Kunta for bthreebbo and Alright for bsevenbbo. So it was like I matched the number up with the song off of To Pimp a Butterfly, hence funny. I'm going to explain every joke in this video, but without further ado, let's break this shit down. At the very front of bwobbo, we have two sounds, sort of fighting one another for the spotlight, presumably arguing. One is quieter and less assertive, and the other one is higher pitched and significantly louder than the other one. There's this sort of back and forth between these two sounds. Well, the quieter one tries to outshine the bigger one, but the bigger one just keeps putting the smaller one down over and over again. Until the end of the song, where the quieter one sort of gets this shining moment where it gets louder than it has been the entire time, and the big one stops talking entirely. But then it's cut off by the loud one again and leads into the intro to btwobbo is presented as almost like a jump scare with this dramatic shift in volume, like we're supposed to feel fear. With this explosion of sound mixed in with this sharp, I'm not even going to pretend like I know the name of the instrument, a synth maybe. And then the song begins to quiet itself down and it is just this distant banging sound for about 20 seconds until at the end of the song where we hear this sound that is almost indescribable. The best example I have is just some sort of otherworldly being, or possibly one of the two characters from bwobbo, specifically the louder and higher pitched one, reprimanding the smaller and quieter one for speaking up finally and taking the form of this almost monster, becoming sort of this embodiment of fear for the quieter one. Now, listening to bthreebbo, it doesn't really feel like there's much to analyze, but when listening to it, I personally can't help but feel like it gives off this feeling of anxiousness or anticipation, like someone or something is preparing for something or someone. It has a consistent beat in the background mixed with these high and low horns that give a serious vibe to the song. I know that when I have something important going on the next day, I'll throw on bthreebbo to make me feel my best for the coming trials and tribulations I may face in the coming journey. Now, you might be asking, what exactly is bubbo preparing for? bfourbbo is a battle of the same two characters in bwobbo, but the quiet one has found its place. It's spent all of bthreebbo preparing itself getting ready to show its teeth and rebel. And from what we can tell, it succeeded, because towards the end of bfourbbo, we hear the same otherworldly sounds, presumably the originally louder sound weakened and suppressed by the other one, really showing that the quieter one has been able to boost its confidence or maybe strength in order to resist the overwhelming power of what once was the stronger sound. bfivebbo has quite the tone shift, opening with these ghostly and eerie notes. But then something odd happens. At 34 seconds in, it plays the beginning of btwobbo and then distorts in this odd way, returning us to these sort of low bass notes with these high chirping notes in the background. Then at 49 seconds in, if you listen very closely, faintly in the background, you can hear what sounds like the end of btwobbo again, that otherworldly noise that we've heard before. And then at 120, this horrible sound starts to creep in and slowly drown everything out, but then is cut off by another simple drum pattern that plays for 11 seconds, and then that is cut off by what I can only describe as a slide whistle that turns into a Geiger counter, at which that is then cut off by piano. But the piano is really nice. But then the slide whistle returns as one of many Bubbo's jump scares to keep listeners on their toes. And then it starts playing bonebbo backwards, kind of like, you guessed it, Kendrick Lamar on Duckworth. And then it goes back to btwobbo. I can't really tell if it's backwards or just distorted, but I know btwobbo when I hear it. And then it goes back to bonebbo, and then back to btwobbo, and then back to the beginning of bfivebbo, but reversed and sped up, and then btwobbo again, and then nothing. Just the wind in your thoughts. That's how it ends. So let's start from the beginning so we can try and look at this step by step and comprehensively break this whole song down. These eerie and ghostly notes at the beginning of the song are most likely supposed to be conveying some sort of sad or fearful emotion, followed up by playing the beginning of btwobbo and then returning to these low notes and chirping notes. Kind of feels like there's still this sort of lingering fear of the events of btwobbo, but those thoughts are very quickly forced out to try and self-force this more positive mental space as to avoid these scary thoughts, but never really being able to shake them entirely, represented by those very quick and light chirping notes in the background, like almost sort of nervousness. And then that idea is even further pushed by the sounds of the end of btwobbo, the otherworldly sounds creeping back in the background. That fear is creeping in. And then that loud sound comes in, beginning to drown everything out, like it's impossible to ignore. But then cut off by that goofy drum pattern as another distraction to ignore what is really happening. Just finding more and more things to keep us from focusing on what is really wrong. As so many of us do, it's so easy to find escape when the answer we truly need is to just focus on what's wrong and be able to be comfortable with that fear. And then that slide whistle represents the moment of no return. You are fully drowned in fear, and you must face what you are afraid of, followed by the piano. I think the piano, in a way, represents acceptance with its somber tone and its almost relieving sound. It's a feeling of fear, not knowing what's going to come next, not being able to avoid what you're afraid of anymore, but there's no more pressure to do so. It's calming in a way, but it's also terrifying. Eventually you have to move forward, and that experience can be extremely scary, but maybe in the end, it's all worth it. But you can't really know. You just have to do it. It would be better than living your entire life in fear, right? You have to look for a way out, no matter how much it hurts. And that experience is what makes us human. To let ourselves be hurt so much by our emotions, but to have the will to force ourselves to keep moving forward. To anyone watching, feeling like the human experience is not one worth experiencing, well, you're definitely not alone in that thought. I promise you that it is worth experiencing. Most of you watching this video probably know me in real life, but if you're one of the few that found this as a stranger on the internet, and as corny as it sounds, life is a roller coaster. You will go up and you will go down. It is as sure as death. But we have the ability to cherish the good moments and climb out of the bad ones. That's what makes us special. It's extremely hard, but the reward of succeeding is beyond valuable. And this goes for the people I know in real life too. You are special. Do not forget that. And then the slide whistle returns, and then bwobbo starts playing backwards. Kendrick Lamar. And then it plays btwobbo, bwobbo, btwobbo, bfivebbo, btwobbo. You fucking get it. It goes off the fucking rails. Now, as for what this all means, it's possible that the transition from the piano to the slide whistle is representation for when you hit the bottom of that hole. You are surrounded by what you fear most, and things get really chaotic, and things get confused for other things, good for bad, and logic for nonsense. And the question is, where do you go from here? bsixbbo gives me the feeling of what it would sound like to travel through this figurative hole. Not necessarily looking for a way out just yet, but coming to terms with this part of yourself. Understanding that confusion is part of understanding. In this song, it sounds like we're walking through wind, perhaps representing tribulating times. Like we can't rest yet. There's more that we need to do. In the distance, we hear sounds of familiar things, things we've never heard before, things that scare us, things that attract us. And then, at the end of this song, at 2 minutes and 6 seconds, we hear that sound we've grown so used to, that otherworldly sound, but quieter than we've ever heard it. And then it's drowned out by static. And this is not to say that we are forgetting, but that we can learn from our past experiences. If we just forgot everything we didn't want to remember, we would never learn anything. And in this song, we learned that we're free to let go. Let go of whatever this sound may represent. It could be different for everyone. We cannot forget, but we can let go. And this leads perfectly into the next track. You guessed it. It's Duckworth by Kendrick Lamar. bsevenbbo is the closing track on this album, and I think it does a really neat job of wrapping up this journey. It is this calming, beautiful, looping melody that sounds like no other song on this album. It brings a feeling of peace as you listen to it. Then the sound of the ocean fades in and eventually drowns out the melody, leaving only the ocean, rebirthing what we once feared as this lesson that we can use to make the future of our life better and healthier for ourselves. And then the ocean fades out too. And in classic Bubbo fashion, the last few seconds of the album are as follows. This reminds us that there will always be obstacles ahead, or maybe old ones aren't quite done with us yet. But this does not change the message of whether we can or cannot overcome fear. It's simply reminding us that everyone takes a different amount of time to heal, and that we should be mindful of those around us no matter how long it takes them. It doesn't make them less strong. It could just mean that they're more hyper aware of the way they feel, or they're afraid that letting go is going to change them. I feel as though I may fall into one of these categories, but I don't really know, and I don't need to know yet. I have my whole life left to figure that out, and so do you. So, in conclusion, I think we can learn a lot from Bubbo. It reminds us that healing is not just a matter of growing a resistance to those things that hurt us, but also understanding pieces of ourselves that we may want to remove can be changed instead, and for the better of ourselves and those around us. And that when we get put into low spots, the high moments that come after are worth the fight. And that everyone on this rock is different, healing process included, and that we should be grateful for that and mindful of those around us. Or maybe it's just some fucking noise, I don't know. Hi. That was 8 months ago. Let's talk about Bubbo again. So, the most important update is I got in contact with the creator of Bubbo. Well, excuse me. The creator of Bubbo is Bubbo. The production manager for Bubbo, Mr. Jake Barton, I got in contact with via Instagram. And he was kind enough to answer some questions. Super easy to talk to, super nice. And overall, really helpful for what we know now. I'll read you what he ended up saying to me. Both albums are arranged to tell a vague story / description of Bubbo and Dinky respectively. I could explain what each track is supposed to mean, but that ruins part of the fun in my opinion. There are a few hints littered throughout the Bandcamp page, however. Feel free to come up with your own interpretations. So I ended up going to the Bandcamp page after that, and I did find some things that he was talking about. There could be more to discover, not quite sure, but what I did find was that if you go to the page for Bubbo, the album, you can see the listing of all the songs. And all of the songs are labeled as Bubbo, but they're still in chronological order. If you click on the info tab for each of these songs, there is a singular word down at the bottom of that page that I'm assuming is supposed to be our singular word of context for each song. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each song again, and with this added singular word of context, I will do my best to say whether I was right or wrong or what might be different. So the weird thing about bfourbbo is its word is walking, which doesn't really tell me if I was right or wrong because of how vague it is. But there are some things that I feel like can be discerned from it. The reason why it's still confusing to me is the song could be the same as I previously described it. It's just they're walking as well. Like the two sounds could still be doing the back and forth thing. Like that could be totally unrelated to the word walking. It's just that's what they're doing. But it does imply that they most likely know each other. Like, if these are two sounds talking to each other, they most likely are familiar with each other, and they're walking somewhere together while the events of bfourbbo are occurring. Where they're walking, I don't know if that's like relevant or important. They could be going literally anywhere, maybe to their LGS. Maybe that's what they're arguing about, is like what the worst color of magic is. It's blue. Regardless of where they're walking, it implies that they're not strangers. It is possible that like one could be following the other one, and like that would imply that they don't know each other, but I get the feeling that that's not the case. So what we have is, at bare minimum, these acquaintances are walking around talking about something. And then the thing happens with like the loud, angry sound that I talked about so much. Now, contextualized with the word walking, the sound could be something different, like a new third factor that maybe they run into, but it's kind of too early to say whether or not right now. btwobbo's word is fatigue, which, given like the sharp sound at the beginning, kind of makes sense. Maybe it's supposed to be like the pain of like a migraine or like a headache, like mental fatigue. It could be caused from maybe some of the frustration built up, like, just to sort of tie it back into bfourbbo, maybe. I do think it's still possible that the sound at the end of bfourbbo is still one of the two lashing out or snapping at the other one, and like it's in reaction to like mental or social fatigue as opposed to physical. But it's still pretty early in the album to make any defining decisions or like editorials to what I've said this far. bthreebbo's word is waiting. This was one of those ones where I feel like I kind of was really close with what I said originally. I originally said it was like sort of a song of anticipation or like anxiety, which could like play into the word of waiting. I think that those can be closely associated in this scenario. Maybe it's like supposed to be like an awkward waiting, like between like the snap and the like silence that follows after like someone snaps or freaks out, like waiting for a response from the victim or the aggressor maybe. But other than that, there's not really much else, I'd say. This one is a little interesting because this was the one that I said kind of sounded like a fight or like an argument, like the part 2 of bfourbbo. But the singular word of context we get is pray, which kind of throws a wrench in that idea. I could kind of contort this word back into the original meaning if I really wanted to. Like, say, like someone during the argument or fight is praying for like safety or like to come out on top. But I feel like it's more likely that this is less of a fight and more of like just a conversation after the fact, as opposed to like another argument. So it still is like decently intense, but maybe not to the level that I like put it up to originally. We do hear that sound obviously at the end of bfourbbo that is sort of died down and quieter. Perhaps instead of like maybe being defeated like how I phrased it last time, more like remorseful or apologetic for their actions and like snapping out. There is also this part 34 seconds in where it gets super intense, like kind of simulating like the dynamic flow of a conversation, but this conversation seemingly ends okay. This is another one where it was kind of a curveball for me. Daydream may be possibly the furthest possible descriptor that I used to describe bfivebbo originally. I originally said it was regret and remembering, which sounds way different than daydreaming. But it's possible that I may not be as far off as it sounds. Like, maybe daydream is meant to be, like, intentionally misleading. Because, I mean, bfivebbo still kind of consists of, like, those weird parts where it gets super anxious and, like, chaotic. Like, there's still, like, crazy stuff going on. Like, the reverse part kind of gets out of hand, which does, like, kind of remind me of another thing, but I can't really think of it right now for some reason. I don't know why. It'll come to me. But The fact that all these things are still here kind of makes me believe that daydream is intentionally misleading and that someone is like attempting to daydream or think about other things, but they're being overrun by all the other stuff. Just now with the added context, it's more of like an implied struggle as opposed to just an acceptance of sorrow. Like there's more of an implied like refusal of negative emotions. And I feel like the piano is a bit recharacterized as like a moment of peace and chaos as opposed to like a descent into sorrow like I said it was. It's a good thing now instead. It's like knowing that you can moderate your emotions and like you do have some control over your life in moments of chaos because no feeling is permanent. Bsixbbo's word was grief, which I think I absolutely nailed that one. I originally said bsixbbo was sort of this figurative whole that the character we were experiencing this story through was traveling through, like experiencing sorrow and like confusion. Wandering sort of aimlessly through this like figurative whole. I think I was correct, honestly. And when I was sitting at my desk writing the script for this second part, and I read the word grief, I was like, wow, that's actually really accurate to what I think I said. And what I thought 8 months ago wasn't just complete nonsense. Which is cool, because it validates me as the smartest man alive, and also makes it so I get to spend less time writing a script. This one I also feel like I wasn't like... It's hard to say for bsevenbbo because its word is end, which is really vague, so I could be entirely wrong and just not know it. But, I mean, it's also hard to say that if the word end implies literally anything beyond this being the end of the album, or like maybe end means something. Like it's the end of a cycle, or the end of like something that's happening. Which I'm not gonna pretend like the single word descriptions for every other song isn't also vague. But I mean, with that, like, end is just kind of like anything really. After a little bit more thought, it does feel like maybe end implies a little bit more than it seems, just because at the end of bsevenbbo it plays the sound that sounds like the beginning of bwonbo, which kind of implies that it's a cycle, and the whole album kind of just like at the end loops back to the beginning, which does kind of remind me of another album. I honestly believe that you can project a lot of things onto bubbo. Like, it really just depends on how you're feeling while you're listening to it. But broken down to its simplest parts, I believe it is someone put into an unfortunate situation, going through the trials of struggle and grief and anguish, ultimately coming out different but stronger, and not feeling like they have to continue struggling until, like at the end of bsevenbbo, it happens again. We will always struggle with things, but it doesn't have to be forever. But once we climb out, we become susceptible to struggling again. It's a little bit scary to think about, but honestly, I do see that there is a positive side to it. Enjoy the goodness of life because you don't know how long it will last, and don't let the struggles of life make you believe that it will last forever. And I believe that is everything I have to say about the Funny Yellow album. I do want to genuinely thank the people who gave me so much shit for not finishing this video, because without them I probably would have never made it. And I do also want to thank Jake Barton for being polite enough to talk to me. He was super easy to talk to, really chill guy, and also being seriously helpful in the journey for the meaning of bubbo. I hope this video was at least slightly entertaining to watch. If you leave this video with anything, I think it should be this. People care about you, people love you, and you should go listen to bubbo. And Damn by Kendrick Lamar, and GNX by Kendrick Lamar. Okay, bye.